Hey Dialectics, today we're going to continue breaking down Capital by Karl Marx. This will be chapters 11 probably through 20. That's probably how I'll do it another 10 today. If you like these breakdowns, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that I'm saying during these breakdowns, just put it in the comments and I'll probably make a video when I'm done with the book, like answering any questions from the comments of the 3 videos. So let's start, shall we? The next chapter is called Rate of and Mass of Surplus Value. It's basically how much can they squeeze out of you and how fast. In this chapter, Marx goes into 2 ways that capitalists can increase their surplus value. One is the rate of surplus value. That's how much each worker can produce over the amount of time that they're working. And the other is the mass of surplus value. Basically, how many workers can you get to produce value for you? As a simple example, if a worker creates $100 of surplus value per day and the capitalist employs 10 workers, that's $1,000 worth of surplus value. But if you can get each worker to produce $150 of surplus value per day, then that's $1,500 a day from the same 10 workers. That's the increasing of the surplus value from each worker. The other option you can do is if you hire 10 more workers, then you can double it, obviously. So if you can get each worker to make $150 a day, and then you can turn your 10 workers into 20 workers, you obviously double that, then you're making $3,000 a day in profit. That's where surplus value comes in. What controls the rate? The rate of surplus value depends on how long the necessary labor time is, how much time it takes to produce your wage, how long the surplus labor time is, the rest of your workday. So capitalists can boost profit by paying workers less money, speeding up production, more output per hour, or reducing idle time, shorter breaks, tighter schedules, less days off, those kinds of things. What controls the mass? The mass surplus value depends on the number of workers and the rate of surplus value per worker. So if the rate is low, a capitalist with 1,000 workers can still produce massive profits. A good example is McDonald's. McDonald's might only get a little surplus value from each worker, but with 2 million employees, the massive total is what counts. They still make massive profits because of how many workers they employ. And the reason that small capitalists get crushed in this system, Marx points out that small capitalists who can't afford to expand or speed up production fall behind. They either exploit workers harder, go out of business. Those are your options. This leads to a bigger capitalist eating smaller capitalists, increasing the centralization of capital, a theme he gets into quite a bit later. Can capitalists produce value with fewer workers? Yes, but only if they can make each worker produce more, lengthen the working day, or automate parts of production, which he goes into later in later chapters. But there is a limit. You still need labor power to create value. Machines help, but only the human labor creates surplus. Machines just pass on the value that they have. So to break down this entire chapter very shortly, capitalists can grow profits by increasing the rate, which is value per worker, or the mass, which is total value from many workers of surplus value. That's the whole point. Even a low rate of surplus value can create profits if enough workers are involved. Capitalists can push for more intensity, faster output, and lower wages. All of these will increase rate. The logic of capitalism drives relentless expansion and competition, forcing small firms to exploit more or they go out of business. That's the whole system. Okay, now we're going on to chapter 12, the concept of relative surplus value, or how bosses make you work harder without making you work longer. So far, we've been talking about the absolute surplus value, where capitalists just make the workday longer to squeeze out more profit. Marx now introduces something new, the relative surplus value, how capitalists extract more value without adding more time by changing how that time is used. Simple version is absolute surplus value is more work hours. They give you a 10-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. Relative surplus value is more value per work hour. A good example is if it takes you 4 hours to produce your daily wage worth of goods, that's your necessary labor, but you work 8 hours total, the second 4 hours is surplus labor. That's 4 hours you give to your boss. That's a 50-50, half for you, half for the boss. But if new tech comes out or new methods reduce your necessary time to just 2 hours and you still work 8, now the boss gets 6 hours of surplus value instead of 4 without changing your schedule at all. That's relative surplus value. How do capitalists do this? They increase productivity, especially in industries that make workers necessities like food, clothing, rent. If those goods can become cheaper to make, then your wage doesn't have to buy as much to keep you alive. If bread costs less, the boss can pay you less without changing your standard of living. The result, less of your time is needed to earn your keep, and more of your day becomes free profit for them. The main tools of relative surplus value are new technologies, better organization of labor, assembly lines, scheduling, efficiency experts, cheaper consumer goods, especially stuff workers need to survive. If they can make things you need to work to survive cheaper, and they don't have to give you as much for you to survive, and they can keep more of it. And it's not just about individual workers. Marx zooms out, capitalists compete by adopting methods that increase relative surplus value. If one company gets faster, the rest have to catch up or they will go out of business. This leads to widespread mechanization, faster work routines, relentless cost cutting, so that no matter what, the boss has to maintain their profit. So even if your boss isn't a cartoon villain, the system forces them to exploit workers as much as possible to stand a chance against the bigger capitalists. Surplus value ratio goes up, but the wages don't. Capitalists can double productivity, but that doesn't mean they'll double your pay. You still get just enough to survive. All the extra value you now produce per hour goes straight into the capitalist profits. That's relative surplus value in action. So to break this down as simple as you possibly can, you work 8 hours a day making shoes. You need 4 hours worth of pay to buy food, rent, etc. Then automation makes food cheaper. Now you only need 2 hours a day to pay to survive, but you still work 8 hours. That means the capitalist just gained 2 extra hours of profit and your life didn't get any better. So that's basically chapter 12. Now we'll go on to chapter 13. So chapter 13 is cooperation. Marx just explained how capitalists increase surplus value through productivity. Now he explores the first and simplest way that they do that, through cooperation, getting a bunch of people to work together under one roof. This is the beginning of the modern workplace. From individual to work to collective work. Before capitalism, people worked individually. A shoemaker in a workshop, a baker in their own kitchen, a tailor sewing clothes. Capitalism changes this by grouping many workers together in one place, all doing similar or related tasks. This isn't fancy or technological, it's just more hands, more output, one boss. One shoemaker makes 1 pair a day. 10 shoemakers together maybe make 15 pairs a day, not just 10, because they can help each other specialize and keep a rhythm. This is cooperation. 1 plus 1 ends up equaling more than 2. When you're working under capitalist command, the boss gets all of that extra. But who controls this cooperation? Marx is very clear. Cooperation isn't about community or teamwork in the capitalist system. It's all about control. The capitalist directs the entire operation of the labor group like a conductor conducting an orchestra. Workers no longer decide how they work, they just follow orders. The collective power belongs to the capitalists, not to the workers, even though the productivity boost comes from people working together. The benefit of it goes straight to the top. The power of many workers combined becomes a tool of the boss. What should be a collective strength becomes an individual weakness because the boss owns the tools, the boss owns the product, the boss commands the process. Why this boosts surplus value? By organizing workers into groups, the capitalist can produce more with the same amount of time, reduce wasted effort, standardize tasks, no duplication or no downtime. This makes each worker more productive, which means more surplus value per hour. And remember, surplus value equals the unpaid labor turned into profit. This is the beginning of the factory. Cooperation is the foundation of later developments like the division of labor, which he'll go into in a little bit, machinery and automation, the modern factory system. But it all starts with one simple move. Put a lot of people in one place, make them work in sync, and then take the value that they produce. That's the entire system of capitalism. The simplest way you can make this is a bunch of kids make lemonade alone. Each sells 5 cups. A capitalist brings them together, organizes roles, squeezes, so some squeeze lemons, some pour, some sell. Now they sell 100 cups a day. But only the capitalist keeps the profits. The kids, they still just get the money from for the 5 cups. This is basically the breakdown of how capitalism works. The workers get organized, work together, produce more than they need, and then the capitalist takes all of the surplus. That's chapter 13. Now we'll go on to 14. Okay, now we're going to go on to chapter 14, the division of labor and manufacture. Basically, how they turn your job into one tiny soul-crushing task. We've seen how capitalism boosts productivity through cooperation, putting workers together. Now Marx shows the next step. Break each worker's job into smaller and smaller tasks so that they become faster, cheaper, and easier to replace. This chapter is all about the rise of manufacturing and hyper-specialization, from whole crafts to piecework. Before this, artisans made a whole product. A shoemaker made the entire shoe. A carpenter built the whole table. With manufacture, Marx explains that it changes. The job is split into many tiny steps, and each worker just does one. This makes the workers faster at their one task. They're much easier to train to just do that one task, and they're much easier to replace. In a good example is like to make a pin. It used to be one person cuts the wire, another straightens it, another sharpens the point, another puts on the head, and another packs it. Now most of that's even done by machining. Why capitalists love this? It's specialization. It boosts productivity. You don't lose time switching tasks because every time you change tools, you lose time. You can master your tiny function. Whatever the one thing you do is, you're going to be really good at that one pin you put in or whatever. The capitalist can train anyone in minutes to do your job. That's the other advantage. Anybody can be trained very fast to do it because your job is just one task. What's the cost of this? It's the dehumanization of workers. When your whole day is turn, screw, pass item, turn, screw, pass item, you lose your connection to the product, to the craft of making the product, and to your own intellect and creativity. Marx says this cripples the worker physically by massive physical strain on just doing the same repetitive task. Mentally, there's no skill development involved. You're not getting better at anything. And spiritually, it alienates you from the work itself. You're never proud of the object you built because you didn't build it. You just tightened a screw. It's a productive mechanism whose parts are human beings. And that's just wrong. There's two types of manufacturers that Marx identifies. Heterogeneous manufacturer, different craftspeople work on parts that come together at the end, like a cabinet. One person carves, one person polishes, and one person assembles. And then there's organic manufacturer. One continuous process, each step feeding the next, like a factory line. Constant flow, no breaks between steps. Both are focused on efficiency and control, but organic is closer to modern factories. In this, workers become tools. As each worker performs one mechanical task, they themselves become replaceable machine parts. They don't own the tools, they don't control the process, they don't even understand the whole job anymore. The more productive the system gets, the less powerful each individual worker becomes, and that's on purpose. The basic simple example is imagine you're baking cookies. One person makes the dough, one person rolls it, one person cuts circles, one puts them in the oven. You don't bake cookies. You press a cookie cutter 1,000 times a day. You're not a baker anymore. You're just a living machine. That's chapter 14. Let's go on to 15. Okay, so let's do chapter 15. Machinery and modern industry. Or the factory becomes a monster and you all become its fuel. This is the climax for the part of the book that's how capitalism produces surplus value. Here Marx explains how machines and large-scale industry totally reshaped labor, society, and basic life itself. Before machines, a worker used a tool like a hammer. Now the machine uses the worker. Instead of a human controlling the tool becomes part of a mechanized system that controls the human. The key difference is a hand tool was powered by you. A machine is powered by electricity or automation. The worker adapts to the machine, not the other way around. This is the start of the factory system. Machines do three big things for capitalists. One, they speed up production. Two, they reduce labor costs. Fewer workers, less skill required for each worker. And three, they break the worker's resistance. A good example is a spinning jenny can do the work of 20 hand spinners. It doesn't get tired, doesn't strike, it doesn't demand wages. And if you complain, you're fired. There's always someone else who can push a button. Capitalists don't love innovation. They love the control and power over cheap labor. In this, he talks about de-skilling and disempowerment. Machines take away a worker's skill, turning them into a button pusher or a machine feeders. You don't need a shoemaker anymore. You just need someone who presses a lever. This destroys craft knowledge, bargaining power, and job security. Workers become easier to replace and therefore easier to control. Workers have to compete against the machines, and they will always lose. Marx shows how the introduction of machines leads to wage cuts, layoffs, because the machines can work faster and longer, so workers get replaced or forced to accept lower pay to compete. Instead of liberating people from work, which is what machines should do, machines just create more misery because the capitalists own them. The cycle of industrial domination. Marx describes it's a vicious loop. Machine is introduced, workers lose jobs. They get desperate and unemployed, which leads to lower wages, which leads to more competition amongst workers, which the capitalists invest into more machines. Rinse and repeat. The factory becomes a profit machine fueled by human bodies, broken families, and burned out people. He talks about how machines don't care who operates them, which is why capitalists started hiring children. The age of machines is the age of child labor, is something Marx said. And he doesn't blame women or the workers for what's capitalism is doing to the family. He blames capitalism for breaking down the family and using citizens as fuel for their factories. Machines control the pace you work as fast as it turns. This means less rest, fewer brakes, constant pressure. The capitalist no longer has to yell. The machine does it for him because it controls the speed of the assembly line, so you just have to work to catch up to it. The factory system is a system of total control. The factory isn't just about production. It's about discipline. It's the layout of the building, the rhythm of the machine, the structure of the time, shifts, bells, brakes, all designed to extract the maximum surplus value from you. And that's basically chapter 15. Let's go on to 16. Now we go on to chapter 16, absolute and relative surplus value. This chapter is basically a summary and transition. It wraps up the last few chapters and sets the stage for the next phase of the book, the appearance of wages. And this is kind of how capitalism messes with your everyday. He recaps the two methods of creating profit or surplus value. Absolute surplus value, make the workday longer. More hours equals more labor. Example, make a 12-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. This is time theft in its rawest form. The other option is relative surplus value. Make the workers more productive so that they create more value in the same amount of time. Lower the wages, increase the amount of things they have to do per hour. A good example is the wages stay the same, but your output per hour doubles. This is the relative surplus value. Both forms involve workers doing more than they're paid for and not getting paid for it. Marx explains that absolute surplus value was the first stage of capitalist production. Early factories, longer days, child labor. Relative surplus value came later with modern industry, machinery, scientific management, and scientific advancements. Each message reflects the developmental stages of capitalism. First, extract more hours, then extract more from the same hours. This chapter sets up an important point. Surplus value isn't just created, it's created through the structure of the workday. And whether the capitalists stretch the day to compress your task, the goal is the same. Pay the workers for a fraction of the value they produce. Keep the rest as profit. That's the basis of capitalism. Profit looks clean, but it's built on exploitation. We made X, paid Y in wages, and earned Z profit. But Marx is saying that profit comes from the unpaid labor, whether through absolute or relative surplus value. It doesn't just look that way because the surface of capitalism hides its true engine. Exploitation. And that's basically chapter 16. Now we get on to chapter 17. In chapter 17, Marx goes into changes of magnitude in the price of labor power. Why your wages go up, down, or nowhere, but it doesn't change your life. This chapter shifts from how surplus value is produced to how it appears in the wages workers actually receive. Marx is zooming in on what affects the price of labor power, your ability to work, or even when your wages move. You're still getting exploited. The price of labor, Marx sees labor power, your ability to work, as a commodity, like any other commodity. Its price is determined by the cost of keeping you alive and able to work. So when we talk about the price of labor power, we mean how much do you get paid for selling your ability to work for a day, a week, etc. What can change that price? Just like bread or oil, the price of labor can go up or down based on three things. The length of the working day. If the working day gets longer, your wage might stay the same, so you're being paid less per hour. If it gets shorter, pay stays the same, your wage increases. Very rare in capitalism. The second thing is the intensity of labor. If you're forced to work harder or faster during the same hours, you're producing more value. But unless your wage goes up, spoiler alert, it usually doesn't. The rate of exploitation increases. So no matter what, if you're producing more but your wage isn't going up at the same amount you're producing, then you are being exploited more and the boss is keeping the profit. The productiveness as labor is the third way that they do this. This is all about technology, tools, and techniques. If you're making twice as many shoes because of better machines, but your pay stays the same, you're getting more surplus value to the capitalist. Again, more exploitation. So why don't wages reflect real effort? Because capitalists only pay enough to cover your value, what it costs to keep you working. Food, housing, medical, maybe. Even if you work faster, work longer, or work smarter, your wage is not based on effort. It's based on what the system has to give you to keep going. They don't pay you for what you do. They pay you for what it takes you to keep you alive, so you will have to keep working. That's chapter 17. Let's keep on going. Okay, now on to chapter 18. Various formulae for the rate of surplus value. This is probably the chapter where Marx gets the most mathy, but all right, we'll try to make it as simple as I can. The real ratio is surplus versus necessary labor. Marx says the true rate of exploitation is surplus labor time divided by necessary labor time. So let's say you need to work 4 hours a day to earn your wage. This is the necessary labor, but you work a total of 8 hours. Then you work 4 extra hours unpaid. This is the surplus labor. The rate of surplus value is 4 divided by 4 equals 100%. This means you are being exploited at a rate of 100%. You produce twice as much value as you're being paid. But capitalists like to use a different formula. Marx shows how capitalists try to hide this reality by using tricky math. Surplus labor divided by necessary labor. Instead of that, they'll use surplus labor divided by the total labor, or wages divided by the total value produced, or profit divided by wages. These all make the exploitation look smaller than it really is. It's like measuring how much water is missing from your glass by comparing it to the entire ocean. You work 8 hours. 4 hours you earn your wage, that's the necessary labor. 4 hours is unpaid, that's the surplus labor. In the capitalist formula, you get 50% of the value you created. But in a Marxist formula, you're being exploited at 100% because half of your time was not paid. The reason this matters so much is because capitalism disguises exploitation through the way it calculates value. It treats wages as the full payment of labor. It ignores a big chunk of your work goes unpaid. So when you look at your paycheck, it might seem fair, but you're really only getting paid for a fraction of the value that you've created. Profit looks like magic, but it's just your stolen time. Marx says that profit is not mysterious. It's just the difference between what you produce and what you're paid. But capitalists use accounting tricks to make it seem like we earn this profit through smart investments, innovation, risk. Marx is like, no, you earned it through unpaid labor of your employees. That's how you earned it. That's chapter 18. Go on to 19. Now let's go on to chapter 19, the transformation of the value of labor power into wages. This is the key moment in the book where Marx explains the central illusion behind capitalism. Why does it seem like you're paid for your labor when you're actually paid for your labor power? And what is the difference? Labor versus labor power. Labor power is your capacity to work. That's what you actually sell. Labor is the actual work you do. That's what your boss gets. You get paid for labor power, but your boss uses it to extract more labor from you than they're paid for. So as an example, let's say it takes 4 hours of your daily wage to earn to stay alive, but you work an 8-hour day. You're paid for your capacity to work, not for every hour you actually work. That extra 4 hours, that's surplus labor. It's unpaid work. That's profit for the capitalist. The disguise of the hourly wage makes it look like you're paid by the hour or by the task, but Marx says you're not being paid for the hour of work you just did. You're being paid enough to survive another day and keep working. This means that the form of wage hides the content of its exploitation. A good example of the illusion is if you work 8 hours and earn $120, so it looks like you're paid $15 an hour, but the reality is maybe it only costs $60 a day to keep you alive. Food, clothing. So that's all the boss really needs to pay. You worked 8 hours, but only needed 4 to reproduce your labor power. So the other 4 hours, it's stolen time, hidden in the wages. The exchange looks fair on the surface, but it's not. Marx emphasizes this is why capitalism feels fair. Because on the surface, it looks like you sell your labor, you get a wage. It seems like a square deal, but it's not true because beneath the surface, the capitalist uses your labor power to generate more value than they pay you for. You're giving them extra work for free every single day. The wage form makes exploitation invisible. This is the genius and cruelty of the wage system. It turns exploitation into a hidden, normalized part of daily life. Workers think, I agreed to $15 an hour. I did my 8 hours. I got paid. Sounds fair. But Marx says that $15 isn't paying you for what you produced. It's just what it costs to keep you producing. That's chapter 19. Let's do chapter 20. Okay, let's do chapter 20. This will be the last chapter for this video. It's on time wages. Now that Marx has shown how wages hide exploitation, he starts exploring the different wage forms. Time wages, getting paid for each hour, each day, or each week. This is probably the most common form of wages that we interact with. You get a fixed amount of money for a certain amount of time. Example, $20 per hour, $160 per day, $800 a week. It sounds simple, but Marx asks, are you being paid for what you produce? Or are you being paid to show up? Time wages conceal the true exchange. Remember from chapter 19, you don't get paid for your actual labor. You get paid for your labor power, your capacity to work. But with time wages, it feels like I worked 8 hours, I get $160. It seems fair. But as Marx says, that's the illusion. In reality, you may only need 4 hours of work to earn that $160, i.e. cover the cost of your survival. But the other 4 hours, that's surplus labor unpaid, which is the profit for the boss. Time wages make exploitation flexible. This is the biggest capitalist magic trick. If productivity increases, say machines help you make double the goods in 8 hours, you still get paid per hour, not per output. So if the boss makes more money, You still get $160 a day. Exploitation just got bigger, but it's a lot harder to notice. The boss can even lower your wages, like your daily wage, slightly if the price of food or rent things drop, and it will still seem fair even though you're giving up more value. Time wages can hide wage cuts. If a boss says, we're cutting your day's wage from $160 to $140, it's just a $20 cut, right? But Marx points out that if it still only takes you 4 hours to produce the value of your wage and you're working 8, the rate of exploitation has just gone from 100% to 120%. So the form stays the same, but the intensity of the exploitation increases. And this causes class divisions within time wage workers. Even though all time wage workers are exploited, some earn more than others. For example, a factory worker might earn $15 an hour, while a skilled technician earns $25. This can make it look like capitalism is rewarding skill and fairness, but it's not. Marx says they're still all selling their labor power just for slightly different prices. The real class line isn't between the $15 an hour and the $25 an hour. It's between those who sell labor power and those who buy it. That'll be the end of this video. I'll do part 3 here probably in a couple of days. If you have any questions of any of the topics that I've covered, put them down in the comments and I'll try to make a video at the end where I go through and answer any questions and things like that. Let me know what you think of this breakdown. If it went too fast or didn't break anything down far enough, let me know. Hope you liked it. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Have a good day.